All right, welcome to episode 11 of Mr. K is Wrong, the podcast where I debunk somebody's memes that they post on Facebook. Yes, there's somebody that I used to know named Mr. K. He was a conservative Republican type when I knew him back in my high school days, but he's gone further and further down a right wing rabbit hole, and it just basically has grabbed him and just will not let go. So today's meme isn't quite as dramatic as some of the ones that I've dealt with in the past, or the talking points aren't as, crazy or racist or whatever you want to call them. Um, but nevertheless, there's some hypocrisy to explore here. So I'm going to address the hypocrisy in a right wing AI video meme that Mr. K posted. It was posted after Joe Biden pardoned Hunter Biden and humorously depicts Hunter Biden playing around in a large pile of cocaine. Now, admittedly, the little video is actually funny. It's something I could laugh at. Although it's not like an absolute knee slapper or anything. I'm not saying, it completely blew my mind and just was a comedy revelation, but nevertheless, it was humorous. I see the humor in it. But yet again, this is another example of partisan hackery where somebody can only focus on the scandals that are gripping one side of the political aisle. In this case, of course, the pardoning of Hunter Biden by Joe Biden, his father. And I'm eventually going to address sort of the elephant in the room, which is that they're as slippery and slimy as that was for Joe Biden to do it. I'm going to address one of the reasons why there's a light defense of him doing that, and I feel slimy for even entering into that terrain myself. But there's something to be said about the pardon having a little bit of defensibility. But when I see a meme like this, I would like examples also where Republicans employed, the same types of behaviors and tactics addressed by these right wingers, and yet they never do it. The pardon powers in this case, the fact that they were employed in questionable ways, and they were, don't get me wrong, they were. But, there are also examples of course, Republicans engaging in illicit behavior such as drug use or sex scandals or whatever, things that are typically considered illicit. Whether or not I agree they are, that's irrelevant. I'm talking about what's in the popular imagination, and of course, what would you know get these Republicans in an uproar as well. So, there are some very specific scandals that I'm going to get into a little bit here. So, I'm going to provide an analysis of the hypocrisy in using humor and outrage regarding Hunter Biden's alleged drug use, considering examples of Republican pardon controversies and scandals involving illicit behavior. That's basically the gist of what I'm doing here. So, I'm addressing hypocrisy in political criticism, and this, is pitting Hunter Biden versus Republican scandals. Let's see what this entails here. So the right-wing video meme humorously portraying Hunter Biden playing in a pile of cocaine after President Joe Biden pardoned him reflects a stark hypocrisy in political discourse. While both sides of the aisle have been embroiled in scandals, a balanced view reveals significant examples of Republican figures misusing pardon powers and or being entangled in drug-related or sexual misconduct scandals. So let's delve into a few of these instances, okay? But you can learn all about the Hunter Biden stuff. Both the fictional and factual examples. Of course, the investigations into Hunter Biden led to practically nothing, really the main thing he's known for is that he had a drug habit, which was known well before the pardon happened and before Joe Biden became president. Even I heard talk of it back then. And the other scandal is that supposedly that there was a sort of economic malpractice thing going on. But of course, nobody was actually held accountable for that because there really was no evidence. The investigation could not, you know, they could not come up with compelling evidence enough to have any sort of convictions. So the case just fell flat. They had all those hearings going on, and it produced nothing. So the real crime that Hunter Biden, of course, was charged with involved his possession of firearms. And, ironically, that's something you would think Republicans, would not object to him having him because they're all about the guns rights kind of stuff. But, if it suits their narrative, they'll drop their standards or create new ones out of thin air, and suddenly guns are dangerous. Like if Hunter Biden has a gun, I guess they're dangerous or something like that. And maybe if the guns are coming from Mexico, then they become something we all need to be, you know, panicking about, a moral panic, because if you have Mexican guns, they suddenly become scary and spooky, you know. But anyway, let's look at some Republican pardon controversies. So you've got Donald Trump's pardons, and I'm not even going to go into the January 6th pardons, which will be an absolute mess once he starts getting into those. I'm going to be talking about how former president and, well, president elect right now, Donald Trump, issued numerous controversial pardons, often benefiting allies and individuals embroiled in corruption. So you had Roger Stone, that freakazoid, who always wants to dress up like a Dick Tracy villain, but he was convicted of lying to Congress and witness tampering. Stone was a close ally of Trump and received a pardon despite his blatant obstruction of justice. And, well, let's face it, his coup plotting, because a lot of these people were plotting the 2020 coup attempts. And, of course, Roger Stone, I don't know if this is criminal per se, but it certainly doesn't make him look that good. He was surrounded by Proud Boys a lot of the time, the so-called Proud Boys, what the leader of which was actually imprisoned on some, I forget what the actual charge was, but there was a high crime involved. Um, I think it was sedition actually, which is not a charge that's just commonly thrown around. But I suppose it might be once Trump administration fully gets in the swing here. They'll start accusing all kinds of people about treason, even if it has nothing really to do with it. In this case, it was because the Proud Boys were plotting to overthrow the election results and ostensibly the US government itself to impose Donald Trump upon the population. You also had Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign manager, convicted of financial fraud and tax evasion. He was pardoned despite the severity of his crimes. These pardons that I just mentioned highlight a pattern of loyalty over justice, calling into question the moral outrage over Hunter Biden's relatively minor charges. Then before that, you had George H.W. Bush's Iran Contra pardons. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush pardoned 6 officials involved in the Iran Contra scandal, including former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger. These pardons were criticized as obstructing justice to protect himself and other political allies. And of course, this technically wasn't a pardon per se, but it was sort of a de facto pardon. The U.S. government ultimately decided not to go after Richard Nixon for his alleged crimes, and that really was one of the big scandals back in the day because it really kind of helped get the ball rolling in terms of not holding presidents accountable for any crimes or alleged crimes that they may have committed. So, that deserves a big boo from the crowd, although people are stupid, so they're probably not going to boo accordingly. And then, of course, you've got Barack Obama, who did not or who decided not to go after George W. Bush for the Iraq War. In fact, at least in my book, the fact that there were so many lies used in promoting that war should be a crime, right? It is sort of a type of fraud when you're lying to the American people in such blatant ways that you're pretending that, you know, Saddam Hussein was some heavily looming threat over the United States when in fact it was really the complete opposite. The United States was constantly threatening Iraq and, in fact, killing a lot of their population through sanctions. From what I understand, something like 500,000 children died from sanctions, which were compared by people to the left to genocide. So you often hear people mention that they were genocidal sanctions. But nobody really saw any problems with that. Of course, that was continued under the Clinton administration. So it was not just, you know, uh, George Bush Sr., it wasn't just Clinton. It was, frankly, I don't remember when the sanctions thing ended. But the point is, like no one was held accountable for that stuff. It was just, the United States could go stomping around the globe doing whatever it wanted, and boom, what do you know? It's a country that is destroyed. The Iraqi society was basically rendered into nothing at a certain point. There were all kinds of terrorists running around that weren't there before, and well, you could also say that the United States was terrorists running around in Iraq if you wanted to, but that might be a harsh left wing critique or something. A lot of people would frown upon that type of comparison. But whatever, I'm gonna make it. But anyway, moving on from that, we also had Republican scandals involving illicit behavior, drug use kind of things. The big one that I often mention that no Democrats or seemingly no leftists ever mention because there's a collective amnesia sweeping across the country. But there was Dennis Hastert, the longest serving Republican Speaker of the House, who served from 1999 to 2007. Well, Hastert, he was once second in line to the presidency, but he was convicted in 2016 for financial crimes linked to covering up his sexual abuse of teenage boys during his time as a wrestling coach. So, wow. Wouldn't it be odd if that was mentioned more? Like, when we keep on hearing, Republicans accusing people being groomers and whatnot. Like, what about Dennis Hastert? That guy was an actual groomer, or whatever you want to call him. He was actually one of those. Despite his moral authority as a leader of the Republican Party, Hastert's predatory behavior and subsequent legal troubles rarely face the same meme-driven ridicule. In fact, nobody ever mentions the guy. It's like he's a ghost. You know, I seem to be the only one who ever repeatedly brings him up because I don't want the comparison to just die out. But you also had Rush Limbaugh, of course, the famous conservative commentator. Limbaugh was a major right wing figure. And if you don't remember who he was or never heard of him, well, I'm kind of jealous, but that's who he was. He was on talk radio, he even had a TV show at one point, but I guess people didn't want to look at him. So they're like, Well, let's listen to his ugly voice instead of seeing his ugly face. But anyway, he was addicted to prescription painkillers and faced charges for illegally obtaining them. Despite the law and order rhetoric he often espoused, his struggles were often excused or minimized by his supporters, even though they definitely were in violation of the law. Like if I don't know how he wasn't, facing a little bit more scrutiny for that, but I mean that's at least my understanding that there were alleged crimes involved, I should say, because obviously they didn't make it to any courtroom, but the the allegations remain. You also had Larry Craig, senator from Ohio. He's known for his staunch opposition to LGBTQ plus rights. He was arrested in 2007 for soliciting sex in a men's restroom, and the scandal highlighted the hypocrisy and moral posturing while engaging in the very behaviors he condemned. And of course, that type of behavior, I mean, it's debatable about to what extent, you know, uh, trying to hook up in a bathroom should be condemned or whatever. I'm not here to get into that debate so much, but the point is the dude was a hypocrite, you know. And then you have the broader implications of the Hunter Biden scandal. While the Hunter Biden scandal or situation is undeniably a political liability for Democrats, they said that it's the key difference between themselves and Republicans, that Hunter Biden would not be pardoned. Well, what do you know? Suddenly is. But the repeated focus on his addiction and personal failings, often depicted in exaggerated meme-like formats, ignores the systemic and individual failings of Republican figures, which is exactly what they're intended to do. They're designed to make one side look good and one side look bad. Whereas, on my podcast, Critical Weight Theory, I delved into, Democrats like Henry Cuellar, who was engaged in a scandal, and others, Of course, Bill. I mentioned here how Bill Clinton, scandalously continued the destructive policies against Iraq. That's another example. And Barack Obama scandalously didn't go after George W. Bush for any of the lies and the specific crimes that he imposed on the Iraqi population, some of which were surely war crimes, but I guess that doesn't matter anymore. Um, but a lot of selective outrage going on. Drug use and scandals are not partisan issues, or they shouldn't be, but people are very quick to turn them into that. And the weaponization of Hunter Biden's struggles contrasts sharply with the leniency shown toward figures like Rush Limbaugh or Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, he was under investigation for alleged involvement in sex trafficking of a minor, alongside claims of drug use during wild parties. These allegations stood in stark contrast to his vocal criticisms of Hunter Biden and others. I mean, it does seem that scandal is actually basically ruining Matt Gaetz. That's an exception to the rule, and a welcome exception, I suppose. Um, and you know what? I want some people to actually look into scandals related to the Democratic Party, by all means, but don't let the Republicans off the hook. That's what I'm saying here. So you've got all that going on. That's these ally protecting pardons, or in Joe Biden's case, family protecting pardons. A lot of self-serving behavior, and it deservedly draws criticism for undermining justice, or at the very least hypocrisy. Like maybe you're like me and you're not a big fan of seeing locking people up as a solution to things. Well, the irony, of course, is that's one of the main things Republicans see as a solution to life's problems. Beat it, bomb it, shoot it, throw it in a cage, you know, or just at least generally shame it, you know. That's what they want to do, but they want to do it very selectively. Leave their party out of it when it comes to finger wagging or pointing the finger, so using humor to ridicule Hunter Biden's struggles or his scandal, it's fair. He's a public figure. It's been happening since we've had public figures that people have exposed their hypocrisy, and that can be all fine and good. But it shouldn't be done while ignoring comparable Republican scandals that reveal a glaring double standard. It's uh, it's just ridiculous that these double standards. I don't like them. Let's get rid of them. So from Dennis Hastert crimes to Trump's pardons, history shows that questionable behavior and misuse of power are not unique to any one party. So instead of perpetuating selective outrage, it's a good idea to maintain accountability across the political spectrum. So how about that for an idea? What a what a revelation, what a bold concept.